Okay, so in this video we're going to be talking about dealing with a breakup effectively and efficiently. Oftentimes when people experience a breakup, unfortunately, they go into some sort of depressive funk, or they're unable to move on and date somebody else because they just feel like, there's no space in my heart. And these are actually not, it doesn't have to be this way. These are what we call pathological mourning processes. It's when somebody hasn't moved smoothly through the letting go process or through the mourning process. And so, how do we do that? How do we prevent pathological mourning, where people get depressed and stuck, and actually let go so that we can move on to something better? The way that we do that is actually by going through the stages of healthy mourning, and these have been identified by Kubler-Ross, one of the world's leading experts on dealing with grief and loss. And what she found in working with hundreds of cases of people that were either dying or who had lost a loved one is that when we experience a loss, there's several stages we have to go through. First, we have to undo denial that the relationship is over, that the person is gone. And that can be tricky for people. And then we have to stop bargaining. People try to bargain and barter to keep that person in their life, to keep that relationship alive. In the case of a breakup, they might continue communication after the breakup and do nice things for that person, hoping that they'll change their mind. The next stage is anger. When we experience a loss, any kind of loss, even if the person was taken away from us because they died of cancer, it makes us angry. So you can imagine how much more angry we get when it was a breakup, where we either broke up with the person because they did something we didn't like, or they left us and abandoned us. There's going to be a lot of anger that needs to be processed. And then the fourth step is sadness. The sadness related to the loss has to be dealt with. And then after all of these things have been thoroughly processed, we get to the stage of acceptance. Acceptance is when you don't miss that person anymore. You're not, depressed about the loss. You actually can look back on the relationship with fond memories and appreciate the good times that you had, but you're not obsessed about it. You're able to move on with your life and find somebody even better. And that's tough for people to get there, but if we go through these stages, we can get there. And it's not always linear. That's an important point. People sometimes think they're just going to go through these linear. There's a somewhat linear, trajectory to this, but people oftentimes jump around. I like to call it they leapfrog. So they'll go from one of these lily pads to the next, and they might jump back and forth until they've done all the work they need to do in each one. So how does this look in a therapeutic context? Well, when we undo denial, and oftentimes it may require the help of a therapist to do this, but we have to really be honest with ourselves about the mixed bag that person was. We have to be honest about that there were some things that we loved about them, but there's also some things that we hate about them, and we can't change those things. Denial likes to keep us focused on all the positives and this fantasy that they're going to come back into our life. We like to screen out all the evidence to the contrary and focus on the little flashes of hope that they're sending our ways. And sometimes we really need to step back and look at the picture more clearly. Like, how much of the communication we're getting from them is giving us any hint of hope versus how much of it is saying goodbye, And sometimes that might require a little bit of assistance, but you can also do a lot of this on your own. Just working through the denial and letting go of that fantasy that the person is going to come back and on their white horse and ride off into the sunset with you, because it's probably not going to happen. The second thing is bartering or bargaining. This is just one way that we prolong the grief that goes along with a loss. We have to absolutely be vigilant not to engage in these types of behaviors. We have to not, try to, make deals with somebody after a breakup to try to get them back into our lives, or do these nice things for them in the hope that they'll change their mind, because that just perpetuates our suffering. So that's something that has to be behaviorally, you have to be on the lookout for it behaviorally. Catch yourself when you're about to do it and put an end to that. Now, anger is a little bit trickier. This is something that really needs to be processed thoroughly. And if it's not processed thoroughly, this is one of the main reasons people get depressed after a breakup. Let's say that John dumps Mary. And in the process, he says, I'm dumping you because you're too needy. Well, if Mary hears that, she's probably going to get kind of angry with John for casting her in that light. But if she doesn't allow herself to feel the anger that she has about it, one way that she might deal with that is just identifying with this criticism of her, saying, oh, I'm not angry with John. I agree with him. I am too needy. And then she walks around beating herself up and self-flagellating with this criticism that I'm a needy person. It's all my fault. If I wouldn't have been so needy, he wouldn't have broken up with me. Well, this is obviously going to lead to a depressive process. So instead of doing that, we need to identify those defense mechanisms that are blocking the experience of anger. And then we need to help Mary to experience her anger as fully as possible. And there's steps to that as well. There's sub-steps here. So feeling anger might involve first just owning it, being aware of it. It might then be feeling it in your body, which is a very specific physiological pathway that has to be identified. And then third, identifying all the motor impulses that go with that anger. So she's going to have some motor impulses, probably violent ones, that need to be expressed using her imagination, obviously never in real life, because that would be illegal. But as she processes those using her mind and her imagination, she can drain that anger from her system so that she doesn't have to keep covering it up by identifying with the critical statements that John made. And as she does that, the depression is going to alleviate. Once the anger has been dealt with, now we can get more directly at the sadness. And this is something people really try to avoid because they think that if they start crying or if they start feeling the sadness about the loss, that they're never going to stop, which is just not true. Sadness, like any other emotion, comes out in a wave. And these waves tend to last anywhere from 30 seconds to 10 minutes. They rarely last more than that. They start, they peak, and then they come down. And when people just allow themselves to be aware of the things that they miss, or the things about that person that they're really going to miss going forward, and just cry about it. Just really feel it in your body. Let that pathophysiological process unfold and let those tears come out. Then that wave of sadness can be released, and it may take several rounds of this, but as those waves of sadness get released, then the person can smoothly transition into a place of acceptance. And they don't have to continue to carry around this kind of pathological mourning process or this depressive process. They can then make more room in their heart for somebody new. I like to say that they're opening up more real estate in their heart for somebody new and hopefully better than their last partner. So that's a little bit on how to deal with a breakup effectively and efficiently by going through the stages of grief rather than going into a pathological mourning process.